Your Legislators is made possible by the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. From developing best practices that help farmers better protect our natural resources to the latest innovations in corn-based plastics, Minnesota corn farmers are proud to invest in third-party research, leading to a more sustainable future for our local communities. Minnesota Farmers Union, standing for agriculture, working for farmers. On the web at mfu.org.
Good evening and welcome to this week's version of Your Legislators. My name is Barry Anderson and I will be your host and moderator for this, our first program in May. Welcome to pleasant weather in Minnesota for the first time in, I don't know, maybe all year. We're delighted you have joined us for this discussion of public policy issues. We're going to begin in a moment by introducing our distinguished panel of guests, but we're currently working on technical issues with at least two of our guests who probably will be joining us in the next few minutes, and we'll be introducing them as they join the program. Let me begin this evening by reminding you that this is your program, and we're looking forward to your questions that we will be giving to our panel. You are reminded that you can send your questions to us via the old-fashioned telephone, or you can send them to us via email, and both of those routes will appear on your screen. We're going to begin this week, as we begin each week in Unraveling the Mysteries of St. Paul, by introducing our guests. We have two guests with us right now, and we have a third that we think will be joining us shortly. Let's start with Representative Pat Garofalo from Farmington. Representative Garofalo, if you would just tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, how long you've been in the legislature, committees you've served on, and your day job, other things you think the viewers might be interested in knowing. The floor is yours.
Thank you for having me as a guest. And just to confirm, can you hear me okay? Is the audio all right?
We are good. The audio is great.
Super.
And we won't say anything about the video, but it looks fine. So
I appreciate that. Well, good evening. Representative Pat Garofalo. I'm serving in my 9th term in the Minnesota House of Representatives. I represent District 58B, which includes the city of Farmington, as well as portions of rural Dakota and Goodhue counties. I serve on the redistricting, Ways and Means, and tax committees, so a lot of fiscal activity this session as well as redistricting. Previous to this, I had an opportunity to serve in the majority twice, one time as chair of the K-12 Education Finance Committee, and one time as the chair of what was called the Job Growth, Energy Affordability, Policy, and Finance Committee. Try saying that quickly twice. I'm deployed in the private sector as a network engineer, married. My wife and I have 2 adult children and spend our time these days taking care of 2 dogs, Kira and Shadow, who are both rescue animals. So obviously lots going on at the Capitol in the next couple of weeks, and I'm happy to take your questions and engage in a thoughtful discussion about where I see current policies going forward at the state Capitol. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Also joining us is Representative Carlie Kotyza-Witthuhn. Did I pronounce that correctly, Representative?
You did. Thank you, Barry. Yes, I'm Representative Carlie Kotyza-Witthuhn.
Blind squirrels find nuts once in a while, but I'm happy I got it right. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, so I represent Eden Prairie, which is District 48B, and I'm in my 2nd term. So I was first elected in 2018, re-elected in 2020. Outside the legislature, I am a stay-at-home parent. I have 4 kids. My husband and I have 4 kids. Our youngest is going to be 2 this summer. And then we have a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And so I stay quite busy year-round. In the legislature, I serve on the Early Childhood Committee and the Behavioral Health Committee. I'm the vice chair of the Commerce Committee, and I also serve on the Workforce and Business Development Committee. So it's
I understand
a lot of fun.
You were elected in 2018, is that right?
That's correct.
All right, very good. And also joining us, who's our senior member of the panel, I do believe, been on this program many times, and actually has rescued us on occasion when we've needed a guest at the last possible minute. Senator John Marty has gotten on his horse and ridden to the rescue. Well, I don't know if there's a horse there, but he's ridden to the rescue, and we're delighted to have him with us again this evening. Senator Marty, tell our viewers, I'm sure many of them have heard the spiel before, but tell them about yourself and your background
Sure.
and your work in the legislature.
Sure. John Marty, been in the legislature for a long time. I am in the minority in the Senate these days as a DFLer. My current district and my new district changed significantly. I currently represent Roseville, Falcon Heights, Lauderdale, and a big chunk of St. Paul, going all the way down to near the state capitol. My new district represents northern Roseville, a little chunk of Blaine, even Arden Hills, Shoreview, New Brighton, and Moundsview. So totally 80% new district. Last time I had 75% new district. So redistricting has whipped me around a lot. I serve right now as the DFL lead on the Senate Finance Committee, the Budget Committee, and also on the Rules Committee. Live in Roseville with my wife. We have a son who teaches in Mexico, a daughter who lives in New York and has a grandson there. And we have two foster sort of grandkids in the Twin Cities area. So, and two dogs, one of whom is a rescue. The other one came from a friend.
So, Senator Marty, you are no longer the senator from the state fair, apparently, right? You've given up the state fair
Not going to
territory?
be anymore. I'm losing the state fair.
All right, very good. Let's begin our program this week while we're waiting for some questions to come in from viewers to talk about what is no doubt the big news since we were last with our viewers on legislative issues, and that was the trust fund hero bill. I'm going to let my guests describe it, but this bill has been the subject of much discussion and effort, and was a bipartisan effort, and I believe has been signed by the governor into law. So, if I'm correct, Senator Marty, maybe we'll start with you as a veteran legislator and just go around the table, talk a little bit about the process and the final product. The floor is yours.
Sure. There were lots of disputes on this. It's a big bill. It's over $3 billion when you count everything, easily over $3 billion. And it's the biggest chunk of it's going to replace unemployment insurance fund, which went way down during COVID, obviously, because so many workers were laid off. And we've never had something like this. Business community has been very vocal about saying how they want this because it would raise their taxes otherwise. And I think there was general agreement that this was a fair thing to do because unemployment insurance problems were not caused by workers and not caused by businesses. It was caused by the pandemic, and we didn't have a choice. And so it's a huge expense to pay it back. But that's something we're doing, providing a reserve in it again. It's normally covered by taxes on employers to cover it, and that's done. The other side of it, the House pushed and fortunately passed a significant hero worker pay, the frontline workers. They were pushing for $1 billion package. The final one was reduced to about half that much. I think it's very much overdue. Thank you to all the people who risked their lives when many others were able to stay at home during the pandemic. The ones who kept their grocery stores stocked, the ones who worked in the hospitals, the ones who worked in all the places at high risk, our first responders and everybody else. So I think it's a good package. It's not what everybody wanted, but it was a reasonable compromise in the end.
Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, tell us a little bit about your view on this process and the final legislation.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah. So I actually sponsored a bill earlier in the session to fully replenish the unemployment insurance trust fund. And an additional piece that I had put on to my proposal was to include hourly school workers into the unemployment program. Right now, they don't qualify during the summer months, so they work during the school year, and then they can't draw on the unemployment trust fund throughout the summer months. And so we're seeing a lot of districts have school bus driver shortages, lunchroom assistant shortages, all of this. And so we're thinking that this, if we allow them to join the unemployment program, we've heard from so many of these workers that they'll have more stability throughout the year. And many of them enjoy having their summers off. So we don't imagine that all of them are going to be drawing on the unemployment fund. But that piece didn't get included in the final bill yet. We're still working on it. So we still have a couple weeks left, and we're hopefully going to find some final agreement on that because it's going to do a lot of good for a lot of people. And these are the only Minnesotans who are left out of this social safety net. When it comes to the replenishment of the unemployment trust fund was definitely a big priority of mine. It was interesting though when I talked to our local chamber here in Eden Prairie and some of our local business leaders, it wasn't hitting everybody equally. So I mean, somebody saw basically the same tax rate, and then somebody saw a 100% increase on the taxes. So it was really interesting to kind of hear from some of the different situations that folks were in, and I'm just glad that we got it done.
Very good. Representative Garofalo, your thoughts?
Well, I believe my colleagues covered it accurately. There's been a multi-billion-dollar deficit, and the UI trust fund has been racking up interest charges. We owe that money back to the federal government. We had a choice. We could either use federal dollars and our general fund surplus to replenish that fund, or we could do nothing and watch every employer in the state of Minnesota get socked with a big tax increase. And the legislature wisely decided to go with option B or option A there, and that is to pay off and fill up that trust fund so our employers and our job creators, job providers don't have to pay that tax increase. It's a good move.
So we have about 3 weeks left in the session, and I think it would be useful for our viewers to maybe get some input from our panel as to the issues that the panel thinks are going to be most significant and we're likely to see some resolution between now and when the legislature goes home. This is not a session where we're likely to see a special session because it's not a budget year. Let's start with you, Representative Garofalo, then we'll go to Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, and then finally to Senator Marty.
Well, Barry, what I would say is that we already have a fully funded budget for 2 years. So we're at a point in the session now where the only things that'll be passing are the things that must pass, not the things that we necessarily would like to. So a problem we have had at the legislature the last 40 years is we've actually had fewer and fewer statutes being signed into law. And so it doesn't mean that government's getting any smaller or spending any less money. It just means that fewer and fewer people are making more and more decisions. Last session, the entire funding of our government, every bill that passed was contained in 31 separate statutes. That was it. And that was a new record low. And so unfortunately, I think you're going to see that trend continue this year where you're probably going to have a lot of things jammed together, decisions being made by a few legislators, and it'll kind of continue that downward trend, unfortunately. Now, I'd love to blame my DFL colleagues for this and say it's 100% their fault, but the reality is this has been a multi-decade trend that under both Republicans and DFL leadership has progressively gotten worse. So that's the bad news. The good news is I expect that in 2023, you're going to see bipartisan support to reverse that trend, and you're going to see the legislative process be much more open, many more individual bills, single subject bills and appropriations, not this end of session train wreck that seems to finish every legislative session.
Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, your thoughts?
Thanks, Barry. So we just finished yesterday passing our supplemental budget bills off the House floor, and we concluded with the tax bill and then a combination bill, which was commerce and climate and energy and workforce. I think that those are all the four that got put together. We had to combine more of the supplemental budgets in the House because the Senate has not. Some of the committees over there have opted not to put forward a supplemental budget bill. So in order for them to match up and go into conference committee, they just had the subjects had to kind of match. So we had some really good debate and discussion on the House floor. I think that we're moving in a great direction in order to put some money back in the pockets of Minnesotans who are struggling the most throughout the pandemic. We've already, we've taken care of our small businesses, the corporations via the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, and now we really want to take care of workers, families, students, and so I think we've got a really great package of tax rebates and tax credits, including my Great Start child care tax credit, which will expand the current dependent care credit for families who have children under the age of 5, and really help them out with child care expenses and significantly reduce the out-of-pocket cost.
Senator Marty, it was interesting that Representative Garofalo opened up with this discussion by discussing some of these process and procedure issues. And you and I have had this conversation, I think, multiple times over the last several years. So this is right in your wheelhouse. Tell us.
I'm glad he mentioned it.
But I think you could respond to Representative Garofalo.
No, I'm glad he mentioned it and glad you mentioned it. And he mentioned how, I knew it was under 50 bills last year. I didn't count precisely, but I looked at it. I made a chart a number of years ago of since statehood, reference library provided chart, how many bills we passed. It used to be, I mean, it used to be every other year, but since the 70s, it's been dropping. It was 700 bills every 2 years they were passing. Then we were doing that 400, 500 bills a year. And now it's down to, as he said, 30 some, I guess. And it's a very steady drop off in the last decades. And I've been fighting. I was trying to actually, don't want to get into separation of powers issues here or something, but I was actually trying to stimulate a lawsuit on the issue several years ago, and was working with the lawyers who said it would be the biggest pro bono case in Minnesota history, and kind of concluded in the end that it wasn't likely to get a ruling our way, so what we have to do it is ourselves. And that's one of the reasons I'm glad to be lead on Finance Committee. I would hope if chairing the committee was going to say that we could have a lot of, you tell the divisions, we're not going to hear bills in finance until you take the crud out of them. And I think that's what we have to do. And as Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn said that, how many bills have to be merged together because the Senate didn't have them all, and the way it's worked out, it's a terrible way to do things. I made a mock title for one of the ones about 6 years ago, a bill for an act relating to, because the Constitution says every bill has to have a single subject which shall be stated in its title. And I do everything from leaking beet juice from trucks to everything but the kitchen sink. And even the kitchen sink was hidden in there somewhere. It was a 1,000-page bill. And it's clearly unaccountable. And I think he's right. It's not a partisan issue. It's something I think growing numbers of members should agree with the public on this, that it's a terrible trend. And it realistically does put more power in the hands of leadership, which is why whoever's in charge tends to want to put more things together because they get to call the shots. But there's a reason we have 201 legislators from every corner of the state. So we have different perspectives, different ideas. And frankly, I tell new members in the Senate, when I was first elected, I'd carry 10 or 15 bills into law each year. And it's not that we pass fewer things. It's just now it's all folded in somebody else's bill. And so voters, if I care about veterans issues and the veterans bill is folded in with housing and 50 other things, then maybe I'm voting against the bill despite liking that because there are other things in the bill. So it's a process change we have to change. And it's process, but it's really important to everything else we do. Having said that, the real short answer to your original question, what's likely to happen, and yet I think there's a lot of ambition for what should happen. In the end, there's such great differences between Senate Republicans and House DFLers that I'm not sure we're going to have a lot of things pass yet. Again, the big package that passed last week was a plus, but I don't know whether we're going to have a lot of movement on education or a whole range of other issues.
We have a viewer from Dodge County who wants to talk about tax policy. Now, keeping in mind that this is not a budget year, nonetheless, issues relating to taxes do get considered in the so-called off or non-budget year. This viewer is concerned about possible changes to gas tax, clothing tax, and the taxation of Social Security benefits. All those things have had some discussion about them. Let's start with you, Senator Marty. What's likely to happen on the issue of taxes, and where might that go with the remaining 3 weeks or so of the session?
Sure. That's one of the big things that is I think all three of us have acknowledged that it's a bill that may not pass because there's such huge differences between it. Senate Republicans were focused on income taxes that would include high income folks. The House had its own package. The governor had one-time tax rebates. And I think the differences are so great, we don't know. On the Social Security taxation issue, about 60% of Minnesota seniors don't pay any social taxes on their Social Security payments because we've tilted it so only the top end, higher end folks have that. And the cost of eliminating that, the taxes that other people would pay, would go up by about $1 billion if we raised it, if we eliminated it on those folks, including the high income folks. So I've favored, instead of getting rid of it, my goal is to make sure that people who are lower income, whether they're seniors or younger people, that they pay lower taxes. And those who have the wealthiest folks, I actually think it's reasonable that they pay their share. And that's why Social Security, if we were to do it, we should do it the way our caucus proposed a year ago, and that was we'll eliminate Social Security taxes, but we pay for it with an increase on some of the higher income folks who get the biggest tax cut from that. So I don't know that it's going to happen. Again, 2/3 of Minnesotans who are seniors don't pay taxes on their Social Security, but it's a hot issue because people are saying, oh, those poor seniors. And I guess I'm just as concerned about the struggling workers who are trying to feed their families and on low wage jobs. I think we should be looking at a fair tax policy across the board. And I'm not sure that's going to happen this year on terms of Social Security.
Representative Garofalo, your thoughts, tax policy?
Well, the good news is Minnesotans don't need to worry about any of their taxes being raised at the Capitol this year. That's an absolute non-starter. The state government's never had more money in its hands than it does right now, and so that's good news. Obviously, the fact that I got John Marty in an election year talking about cutting taxes must mean it's a pretty good environment for us Republicans. So it's a good time. It's never a bad time to cut taxes. It's a great time to cut taxes right now. I think our government's too big. It spends too much money, and taxes are too high. And any tax cuts we can get that the Democrats are in favor of that involve spending less money to the government and letting people keep more of the money that they earn, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. It's always nice to have an election year conversion from those who were trying to raise taxes last year and a couple of years ago, but I'll take it. Better late than never. So again, it does show that the state of Minnesota right now, there really are two Minnesotas. Big government and big business have never had more money. Walmart, Home Depot, Target have had record profits, but it's been the small businesses and individual families who've been suffering under the weight of the pandemic. So anything we can do to get that money out of the hands of big government and help out individuals in the form of lower taxes and lower rates, that's good by my book.
Barry, before we continue, I'd like to respond to that for a second because I'm not saying we should.
I thought you might want to respond, so go ahead and do that.
I might not be saying exactly what Representative Garofalo thinks. No, I actually think that we should first live up to our obligations as a state. We've promised schools, we've mandated things on the schools, such as they must deal with special education. We've mandated that they must teach English learning to students who don't speak English as a primary language. We've mandated those things, but we've never funded those mandates. To me, that's the first thing we ought to do is live up to our obligations. We obligate ourselves. We say in state law, we're going to pay for 2/3 of public higher education. We're at less than 40% now. We ought to live up to our obligations. Then when we have extra money, then you can talk about tax cuts. But to me, I think the first thing we ought to do as a state is live up to our obligations. So I'm not saying exactly what Representative Garofalo apparently thinks I am.
I think we've got that cleared out. Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, your thoughts on tax policy?
Thanks, Barry. Well, what I heard Representative Garofalo say is indeed very true. We have two Minnesotas right now. Big corporations have done better than ever. Wealthy Americans are even wealthier. That goes for wealthy Minnesotans. And so what we need to do is target the relief specifically and directly to the folks who are struggling the most. And that is our small business owners and our students, our college students, and our young families. And I think that there's a lot that we agree on in that arena. But I don't think an across the board permanent tax cut is the right way to go, simply because I've heard from a lot of folks already that they're worried about a recession third quarter next year. And so if we're getting rid of all of the revenue that comes in by these permanent tax cuts, then we're going to be a hurting unit in a couple of years if things don't continue the way that they are right now. But as far as clothing taxes, I don't think that there was a conversation about shifting away from clothing taxes. I think that that's a really popular policy here in the state. I think it brings in a lot of folks visiting from across our borders, and so I haven't heard anything about that. But.
So we have a question from viewers, and this has been kind of a regular, it's made kind of a regular appearance this year. Concern about group homes, staffing in group homes, PCAs, the effects of inflation on trying to hire folks to fill those positions. Viewers concerned about whether there will be any changes in this session. Let's start with you, Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn. Your thoughts on dealing with that particular issue.
It certainly is is a really important topic, and our PCAs and caregivers in a variety of sectors, but particularly for people with disabilities and our seniors who are needing some extra assistance kind of throughout their day-to-day lives, they need to be lifted up and given a salary, hourly wage that matches how important their work is. We've done some really good work on this in the past few years. Make sure that these folks got a pay raise. I know that it's a part of the conversation between now and the end of the session. I'm hopeful that we can get them some additional funding because, like I said, I mean, the job that they do right now, they can turn around and get a job at Target, maybe at McDonald's, and earn more on an hourly basis, but they're not necessarily making as big of a difference. And so lots of people go into that because they have the heart and they have the passion to care for people in their moments of need. But if they can't put food on the table or a roof over their head, they're just going to have to find something else. And so it's a really big problem, and we've got to come together to figure it out.
Representative Garofalo, any thoughts on what might happen in this area between now and the end of the session?
Yeah, and Barry, the workforce shortage is affecting all sectors of the economy, but particularly nursing homes. It's definitely impacting there. And so the best thing legislators can do is they can listen to nursing homes and say, what can we do to help? And there's really two things we can be doing. Number one is by providing additional resources to them. This is a very highly regulated, highly mandated sector of government. And so by listening to them, what we can do is they can't just go out and pay people what they want. We specify in law what that is. And so we should increase that. We should increase their compensation so they can have a larger pool of talented workers to choose from. But the second thing we should also do is we should listen to these providers regarding the mandates that government regulations, laws, and executive rulings have put in place. Many times these group homes and nursing homes are spending money on things they don't want to spend money on. Not because and these things are not providing increased quality of care. They're not providing valuable services to our seniors. They're just government mandates from St. Paul. And if we give flexibility to these providers to be able to deliver care in a compassionate, cost-effective way, it gives them the added incentive to be more efficient and to allow to use those existing resources to compensate workers more.
Senator Marty.
Yes, I'm going to go with the direction Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, I'm sorry, I botched the name today. She said about the importance of the fact that these jobs are paying too little. And it seems to be all the jobs that we as a society say we should care the most about. People who care for others, child care workers, people who work as PCAs, people who work in nursing homes, the ones who help other human beings, is a job we, I think, consider the most noble of all. They get paid minimum wage type of levels, and they're finding that they can't compete. The employers can't compete with McDonald's or other jobs. They're much lower skilled, less difficult work to do. And so the only people in them are people who are doing it because they really care about it. And it's not a career job, not because it shouldn't be, but because they pay so little. And to me, because those jobs tend to be, our economy doesn't have a way of providing them other than government funding them, which is why we have government funding for nursing homes and for personal care attendants and for childcare, because the economy has never been working right for people who are providing one-on-one service. The good news is the Senate Health and Human Service bill actually puts in a huge amount of money. We put in close to $1 billion, largely to increase the wages of people who are working in nursing homes as personal care attendants and so on. And I actually think there's strong bipartisan support to do that, which is very pleasing to me, because the Senate majority has been unwilling to fund a lot of other things that I think are urgently needed. But in this case, they're hearing enough of the crisis from nursing homes, from people who have personal care attendants. I know one person, a personal care attendant, the guy was able to be employed because he had personal care attendants who could take care of him 24/7. Now that he's been struggling to find them, he's kind of more in a nursing home setting. He lost his job from that and so on because he's unable to function without it. It's expensive to take care of somebody in these positions, but we as a society say we care about others. So I'm very pleased that it looks like we're going to have significant bumps in pay for this. To the point where it'll be a few dollars an hour more for people, which is urgently needed given the state of the economy right now. And I'm optimistic that will actually happen yet this year.
So we have a question from a viewer about the status of the bonding bill and what might happen there. We had a little discussion earlier about how some decisions seem to come down to the last minute. I suspect that's going to be true of the bonding bill. At least that's been the historic practice. But that is, of course, a priority in the so-called off or bonding year. And so I think it's a fair question to ask where that's at and what we might see. Representative Garofalo, let's start with you. Bonding bill, what do you think might happen? Any observations on what you think should happen?
Sure. Well, as we mentioned earlier, there's a very high inflationary environment right now in Minnesota. There's a worker shortage. There's supply problems in terms of raw materials. We've had local units of government that when they're going out for bid on their projects, construction projects, remodelings, expansions, they're not even getting any bids from the private sector because the private sector is so busy. Not only are they filled during this construction season, they're full for next year. There's concerns about labor supply and raw materials being supplied. So the usual arguments for justifying a bonding bill just simply don't exist this year. So the most likely outcome is there won't be a bonding bill this session. The government has more money than it's ever had before. Billions of dollars, I mean, nationwide, trillions of dollars have been thrown into the economy. So I think what you're likely to see is that a pause on that discussion in terms of building any new assets or spending more money on maintenance, just because there simply isn't. It's very hard to even get anyone to respond to government bids for bonding right now. And so I think that's the most likely course of action, is you'll see things taking place in 2023, not this year.
Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, your thoughts on the bonding bill, capital investment?
Yes. Well, I think that Representative Garofalo did kind of put into perspective the difficulty that a lot of the construction trades are having right now as far as supply chain, et cetera. And so I know that the bonding committee, the capital investment committee, was still hosting informational hearings kind of past the deadline, because there are a lot of really important projects across the state that could use the investment. As far as timing, I'm not sure. I know that I think we feel pretty strongly that we need to take care of the most urgent needs so that we're not kicking the can down the road, and that those problems then get exacerbated and made worse. And then, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, then we're left with, a building that can't even really be salvaged if we haven't taken care of the leaky roof and some of the other challenges. So I'm hopeful that, that we could find some compromise and come together and take care of the most urgent projects. But I think that Representative Garofalo is probably right in terms of time-wise and what things are looking like.
Senator Marty, your thoughts on the bonding bill?
Sure. I am hopeful we will have a bonding bill. As both the representatives pointed out, yes, the timing is such that with interest rates rising and the shortages and everything else, and the big federal influx of funding for infrastructure, all argue against it. On the other side, the Senate Capital Investment Chair is with the Republicans in charge, and the person they appointed is Tom Bach, a former carpenter. He's really big on bonding bills and is trying to push a very big one. But I don't know what's likely to happen. I think it's, as we all know, it takes a super majority to pass a bill that borrows money at the Capitol. And Minnesota's had good policies on that. But so because of that, because it requires all four caucuses to have buy-in, I'm not sure it's going to happen. But the people are, as you said, it's always a last minute thing, and they've been working at putting together a package. And I'd say I'd give it 50-50 chance of happening at best.
So we have a viewer from Bloomington who wants to know about what the chances are of phasing lead out of hunting and fishing. Now that's a very specific kind of question, which we'll try to answer. But I think also this is a good time to talk a little bit about what action, if any, in the remaining 3 weeks we're likely to see on DNR kinds of issues. So it's a more general topic at the same time. Let's start with you, Senator Marty. I know you've watched these issues over the years. What are your thoughts?
Sure. On the specific question from the viewer, I will say I very much wish we could get that done. We offered an amendment to try and do that. It was rejected by the majority. To me, when you see all the loons contaminated from lead, you see all the problems with our wildlife because of lead in shot and in fishing equipment. It's something that we ought to ban. There's no need for it anymore. Steel shot used to be more expensive. It's not anymore. It's a fair thing to deal with, and I think we should. I hope we can do it in the next year. It's not going to pass this year. The Senate majority will not accept it. On broader environmental issues, there are many of them to be addressed, and because there are strong disagreements, like on energy-related ones, the Senate bonding bill, the Senate transportation bill explicitly bans the use of state dollars to match federal funds on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. That's one that I think there's $68 million that Minnesota could get that's set aside for Minnesota. And the Senate majority is saying no. Senate Republicans have explicitly said we're not going to allow any public funds, any state funds to be used to match the matching requirement for that. And to me, I think there's a huge difference. I think the House Democrats are pushing for some significant climate and environmental things, and the Senate is pushing against them, unfortunately. So I'm not sure a lot is going to happen on environmental protection this year.
Representative Garofalo, your thoughts, the hunting and fishing issue, and more generally DNR legislation?
Yeah, as Senator Marty said, I think it's unlikely you'll see any of these measures moving forward. Historically, the opposition to banning all ammunition types with lead has been that it provides a less lethal shot. So there's an ethics component to hunting that if you have you're shooting animals that don't immediately die. Second of all, we have a supply chain issue right now with supplying ammunition. This would make it even worse. So there's been long bipartisan opposition to doing that. And I don't see that changing this year. In terms of the environmental issues, I think something to keep an eye on is that the Environment Natural Resources Trust Fund, the constitutional dedication expires in 2025. A lot of people have been sleeping at the switch and kind of just woke up and figured out that if they want that extended, they're going to have to do something. I'm someone who feels like that there's over $1 billion in that trust fund right now that's constitutionally dedicated. I think we can take new proceeds and dedicate it elsewhere, but that's going to be a big conversation in the next legislative session as well.
Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, your thoughts?
Yes. So in our House Environment Bill, we have a lot that we're doing a lot toward lead, toward that end, and trying to make sure that certain parts of land for hunting and fishing don't see an increase or kind of continued usage of lead bait or bullets.
Fishing tape.
And so I think that in particular areas, I think that is a really a good move. I mean, making sure that our animals are protected, that our water remains clean. There's a couple of other things that we're doing in the environment bill in terms of lead. So we have a lead and cadmium ban prohibiting the sale of products that are like jewelry, toys, cosmetics, board games. So those are banned that if they contain lead at more than 90 parts per million. And then we also have an allocation in there, funding allocation for lead service line replacement. So we're working with the Met Council in order for them to direct appropriations. If municipalities are looking to replace their lines, they can apply for some matching grants in order to help them do that. Because, I mean, it's certainly a dangerous thing. And we know that, no amount of exposure to lead is safe. And I think, we need to continue making progress in that area.
We have a question from a viewer about higher education and what we might see in terms of budgeting issues or potential extra resources supplied there in this what's left of this session. So let me start with you, Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn. What might be moving in the higher education space, if anything? Whoops, you're on mute.
Darn, I thought I was going to make it through. We have a great higher education
law,
bill.
In fact, you can't complete a program without telling somebody they're on mute. It's required. So it's all
well,
good.
then do I win a prize?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you a copy of old statutes. It'll be
Oh,
great. So
perfect. Perfect.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. You have to have levity, right? Um, I think the bill that we passed off the floor in the House has a lot of good investments at the higher ed level. It's somewhere that we need to continue investing in Minnesotans. We know that we've seen a decrease in attendance over the past few years and a decrease in enrollment, and of course we know that tuition keeps going up. So we really have to kind of find a place to meet in the middle, and make sure that students are getting some of the dollars that they so much need, in order to continue on with their secondary education. On the other side of things, I think that we're looking at some really exciting partnerships, with different associates programs and apprenticeships and those types of things, because we know that college isn't for everyone, and it certainly shouldn't be. It doesn't need to be, because there's a lot that people can do on a life path. They can find their heart's passion and make a solid income to sustain their family and to support their community. So I think there's a lot to consider. I'm not sure what the bill looks like out of the Senate, and if we'll be able to find any common ground to make some of those investments, but I've got my fingers crossed.
Representative Garofalo?
As Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn stated, higher education enrollment has been in a state of decline for many years. And so a lot of times the institutions that are set up, the infrastructure they have in place, necessitates consolidation and downsizing. We have seen some of that taking place in some of these institutions, but really the solution to this is not going to be additional funding or additional spending from the state. What needs to happen is our higher education institutions need to be aligning their standards and their course offerings to what the needs of the workforce are. Candidly, we got too many people majoring in things and getting degrees in items that are just not marketable. They're not providing the skills that are needed in a dynamic workforce. And don't get me wrong, it's great to get a degree that allows you to have a better understanding in the world. But if you're going to borrow tens of thousands of dollars to get that degree, you need a job to pay that off, to pay for that investment. And right now, the majors that are being sold to kids that they're majoring in, the skills are just not needed in the marketplace. It was said by someone a couple of years ago that there were more students in America majoring in journalism than there were journalism jobs in the United States. And we see several sectors of our higher education institutions that are doing that are cranking out and motivating kids to get into majors. And I think one of the things we can do is if we're going to provide additional assistance, to provide discounted rate in those areas that we really need, such as nursing or math and science education, engineering, those sorts of high-end, high-learning, high-income jobs that have made Minnesota a brain power state. We're going to be much better off if we have people majoring in that instead of cranking out people majoring in women's studies.
Senator Marty?
Well,
Not that women's studies isn't important.
I would argue that the only purpose of higher education is not job preparation. It's one of many purposes, and part of it is to make us human. I mean, the arts, you don't need arts to get a job. But why do we have arts education? Why do we have literature? Why do we have all the liberal arts? Because we want people to be more active. We want them to be engaged as humans, as a society. I think that's a big part of it. So we shouldn't say that higher education is solely job creating, solely for the purpose of training people for jobs. But that is a key part of it. And we often miss what we should be doing. Up in some parts of greater Minnesota, the talk about we got to help people get the jobs they can get. Up on the Iron Range, I was meeting with several legislators and with the head of the Iron Range Resource Rehabilitation Board. We were talking about, they talk about tourism and mining. Those are relatively small portions of the economy. The biggest ones, healthcare and building things, and healthcare and carpentry, things like that. The guy head of the IRRB, I think he said that he was one of my colleagues saying, there's a 3-year wait she was hearing for people to get some work done on a home in certain parts of greater Minnesota because the backlog of jobs is so great. And same thing we're hearing, this guy said, yeah, it's exactly what he's hearing in his hometown. It's 3-year wait to get some work done, to even get a bid for work on your house. And when we've got that, and there are a lot of people who are looking for work, The building trades are skilled jobs that pay good wages. So why aren't we using our community colleges better to do that? But that requires funding too. The idea that people should be graduating with debt as big as a home mortgage and they don't have a home to show for it, just an education. That's a generational thing. My generation, you could work summer job working in the school year and not end up with any debt from higher education. Nowadays, people coming in with huge debts. And I think that we as a society have an obligation to do that. So it's not just funding, but funding is a part of it. And we have not kept up our obligation as a state. We've committed in law to funding 2/3 of public higher education. We're not close. So I think it's funding and finding the right ways to fit the right people for the jobs that are needed.
And I have to tell you, Barry, I 100% disagree with Senator Marty. I don't think we should be building a government-funded training program to compete with the highly skilled apprenticeship programs that we have for our trade unions in the state. Minnesota has some of the highest standards, highest education, highest quality workers coming out of those institutions that are 100% privately funded. I don't know why we would fund a government competition for that. That's going to result in more expenses. We should be doing things to promote more construction. If I could just finish, we should be promoting more construction. Promoting items that allow for.
Then we'll go back to Senator Marty. Go ahead, Representative.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. Thank you, Barry. So I think it's really important to notice that all the apprenticeship programs you see, whether it's pipe fitters, carpenters, in all our trade unions, those are 100% privately funded. All that training is by employers, and it puts the trade unions in perfect alignment with what the workforce needs that are of our private sector employers, because you can get all the training in the world you want, but if you're learning things that the private sector economy doesn't want, you're not going to get a job. And I don't understand why we would take something that is so effective and is 100% privately funded to have the government subsidize an alternative. It just makes no sense to me.
And
Senator Marty.
Representative Garofalo clearly misunderstands, because I strongly support the apprenticeship programs. I was going to mention that. I didn't, because I know they're very successful. But in some communities where there are no apprenticeship programs available, where there are people, community college on the Iron Range that could be training people for this, I think we use that. We use whatever we can to help people get the jobs they need. There's skilled jobs needed. There are people who want the skilled jobs. You get them into there. Yes, the apprenticeship programs are tremendous. I'm a strong advocate of it. And as you point out, it's not public funding for there. But to me, if we have people in greater Minnesota that could use some skilled job training things, that's a good place to put it in. It's really important. So I agree with what you're saying. I'm disagreeing with what you think I'm saying.
Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, we don't mean to cut you out of this conversation, but what are your thoughts on the training issues?
Did I start this question? I think we went back and forth a little bit.
I think you did, but I didn't want you to feel that you were left out of the conversation. So if you have any closing thoughts, we'll give you the floor.
Well, I did take my 18-month-old up on a tour of the 49ers training facility, and I think that was thus far the highlight of his life. They run an amazing program. It's a fabulous property, and I think that just making sure that we have the right partnerships in place to make sure that folks who aren't based in that area, that they can get to where the training is, and like Representative Marty said, I mean, maybe there's in today's virtual world, like we're chatting here tonight, I mean, what can be done outside of those training facilities, or what can we do to make sure that people have access?
I knew the 49ers were recruiting early. I didn't realize it was that early. Wow, that's.
All I'll say about this topic is Mr. Thesey was my 7th grade shop teacher, and he advised me that 8th grade shop was an elective and I didn't have to take it. So that tells you about my mechanical and shop skills. I'm very dependent on those people that are being trained, whether in the programs that Representative Garofalo mentions or elsewhere. So
I really enjoyed my woodworking and metalworking classes, but the drafting, not so much. Computerized drafting program was over my head.
Senator Marty and I can tell you about T-squares and drafting tables, which probably the current generation has no idea what we're talking about. But anyway, enough of the get off our lawn moment. Let's move on to another question. One of the things we get with this program from time to time are very specific questions from viewers who really know issues in a way in which sometimes your genial host doesn't. And so I'm just going to ask this question and see if somebody here knows what the answer is. This is a question from a viewer who wants to know, what is the status of the bill dealing with additional years of service for teachers? Someone here know what that viewer is talking about, and can they address that issue? Anybody?
I suspect that it has to do with the rule of 90 and perhaps getting additional that or additional not being penalized for retired teachers coming back into the workforce. I think it may be related to that, but I don't know for sure. Based on the questioning.
Okay. Anybody else want to take a run at that? All right. We have a viewer who wants to talk about transportation, wants to know what might happen with transportation issues in the remaining weeks of the session. Let's start with you, Senator Marty. Anything happening on transportation?
Sure. I'm not sure a lot is going to pass on the legislature because the disagreements between the Republican Senate and the DFL House are significant enough. I'm not sure we're going to pass a lot. Having said that, there's a lot of federal funding coming down in the infrastructure bill, which will do a lot more for, I think, for roads and transit and so on. So I expect a lot of action will be there. And then again, that gets back to the big question, like with the bonding bill, because there's a lot coming from the federal government, it's going to make state action not unnecessary, but it'll make it less priority, perhaps, because simply supply chain shortages and shortages of workers and everything.
Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn, what do you think? Transportation.
Well, two highlights in the House transportation bill. One thing that I heard a lot from constituents throughout the pandemic was about drivers' exams. So people 16-year-olds being able to take their driver's test. And so one of the policy changes we passed in the House transportation bill was that it requires DVS to have an online driver's exam search option that allows folks to see the soonest available appointments closest to a particular location. So it's just a little bit of data changing there, making sure that people have access to, if they're willing and able to make the drive to a site that may be a little bit further out for them, but they want to get their driver's license sooner. I know I went to a different county in Wisconsin when I was 16 because I wanted to get my driver's license faster than our local county had access. And then it also, which leads into that last question there, it waives the knowledge test requirement for drivers 21 plus with a valid out-of-state license who moved to Minnesota. I did have to take the knowledge test when I applied for a Minnesota driver's license, and I think that it's more hassle than we really get the people learn how to drive. The signs are common state to state. It's not like we're trying to learn signs in different languages or to drive on the left side of the road or anything like that here in Minnesota. And so I think that those are two good things. Of course, a lot of funding conversations. There's a lot of, like Senator Marty said, we've got a lot of we don't see eye to eye, particularly on transit and transportation investments, and so I'm not sure what we're going to be able to get past the finish line. But I feel pretty strongly, the Southwest Light Rail expansion ends in my district, or I like to say that it starts in Eden Prairie. But so we did come together, bipartisan, bicameral, pass funding for the audit on the Southwest Light Rail development, and really we want to make sure where the holdups were, what's going on, and make sure that the delay and the ongoing continued and increased expenses doesn't happen again.
All right, Representative Garofalo, your thoughts? We got about a minute left on transportation issues.
Yeah, Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn brought up this idea of being able to waive the knowledge test, and that might have worked for her from Wisconsin, but I don't trust those Iowans. I don't know if we can really have a lot of faith in them having the appropriate amount of knowledge. No, I think both Representative Kotyza-Witthuhn and Senator Marty mentioned this, that the federal government passed a massive infrastructure bill in excess of $1 trillion. And it's going to take some time to digest that amount of money. And keep in mind, we're already, as we mentioned several times, the workforce is already constrained. So if we were to pass more money for transportation, in many respects, it would just sit on the shelf as we're trying to digest through these federal funds. if we're going to be doing anything for roads and bridges, which is always popular, we should be trying to do it at the local level, cities and counties. But in terms of the trunk highway fund, I think the focus is going to be more on creating a statewide match so that we're able to leverage the federal dollars in the infrastructure bill that already passed. But as all three of us has mentioned, there is such a shortage of labor and supplies right now that it's very difficult to have the government come in and create additional demands for services. There just simply aren't enough workers right now, and we've known this was going to happen, but the combination of the baby boom retiring, demographic changes where people are leaving Minnesota and going to the south or the southeast, they were bad. And then unfortunately, when COVID hit, it just made things worse. And so I don't think you're going to see a lot of money spent at the end of the session, and candidly on anything.
That will bring us to the end of our program this evening. I want to thank our distinguished panel of guests. I want to invite you, the viewers, to join us next week. You can send your questions in during the week before our program next week. We'll see that they get to next week's distinguished panel of guests who will help unravel the mysteries of St. Paul. We're grateful for our panel this evening. We're grateful for your participation. See you all next week. Thank you and good night.
Your Legislators is made possible by the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. From developing best practices that help farmers better protect our natural resources to the latest innovations in corn-based plastics, Minnesota corn farmers are proud to invest in third-party research leading to a more sustainable future for our local communities. Minnesota Farmers Union, standing for agriculture, working for farmers. On the web at mfu.org.